Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
Merry Christmas to you, Rick.
I appreciate it. Merry Christmas to you.
Absolutely. Been a lot going on. This week, we have Donald Trump declaring Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and wanted to know your reaction to that news.
Well, you know, the thing about this, I mean, every president since Bill Clinton has proclaimed Jerusalem as the capital, and we're going to move our embassy to the capital in Jerusalem. And yet they don't do it. And so he does it, and everybody freaks out. So I don't know why anybody ought to be surprised by this. You know, Bill Clinton was very adamant about this in 1992, so much so there's some legislation passed to that effect, basically saying, I think it was 1995, the law that was passed that we'll begin the process of moving the capital to Jerusalem with one little proviso, and that was unless the president deems that it is, for national security reasons, not indicated. So they gave themselves an escape clause. And ever since that was implemented, then they've all used the escape clause. So why? I'm talking about all of them have said this. So, you know, Clinton said it, Bush 43 said it, Obama said it, and yet they all didn't act on it. And so then Trump comes in, he says, I'm going to move the capital to Jerusalem, as the last three presidents all proclaimed they would. And everybody says, oh, no, well, we can't do that. Well, guess what? We did. He made the statement it's going to happen. And, you know, it's sending some shockwaves through the Middle East region. And there's some reasons why. I mean, Jordan is sort of the keeper of Jerusalem. It's sort of viewed as their responsibility. The king in Jordan, it's essentially his responsibility to safeguard Jerusalem. And so, you know, he's not happy about it. He thinks it's going to create a security threat. But the bottom line, you know, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Every president since Bill Clinton has said so, and said they were going to act on it, and then didn't want to act on it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's you know, just an obvious fact. He said that in his speech. You know, they're the seat of their government's there, their parliament, the prime minister's residence, their courts. So I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer. I know some people on the left, they, you know, were pretty irritated with the fact that he also talked about, you know, the Middle East peace process while he was doing something that you know, the Palestinians are going to disagree with. But I really admired him, you know, basically saying, look, if we're going to have these Middle East peace talks, we're going to, you know, kind of, you know, reset the rules, and we're going to admit that Israel is a sovereign nation and they can decide where their capital city is.
Can I just say that the Palestinians disagree with everything? It doesn't matter what you say about the peace process, or Jerusalem as the capital, or anything. They're going to find, you know, something that they object to, and they're going to voice that concern. And then, of course, it becomes that, well, you know, you're mistreating the Palestinians. And then, to a large degree, the Palestinians have been proxies for the broader Arab world for a long, long time. That's, you know, that's not to that degree today, but it's still, you know, it's one of those things that I don't really know what it's going to take to make them happy, but there have been some assurances from Netanyahu that policies will continue, that Christians, Muslims, Jews will have, you know, unfettered access to the holy sites, and that's not going to change. So I think it's okay for their capital city to be recognized as their capital city. And I think you'll start to see some other nations that will step in and go, yeah, that was the right thing to do, and we're going to do it too.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought this thing, it was great news, and it was good to see him. You know, good to see him make good on a campaign promise. And, you know, now he could arguably, you know, he could claim he's the most pro-Israel president that there is, considering you've had other presidents promise that they were going to do this. So it was a big news week on that front. I'd like to move now to tax reform if we can. The Senate doing what I didn't think was going to happen, Congressman Crawford. I did not think that they were going to get the job done. Now the bill goes to conference. Can you tell us about what's next?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out. A lot of people think that, they passed theirs, we passed ours, and now, boom, there it is. The two have to be reconciled through the conference process. And then once that's done, it'll issue a conference report. That conference report goes back to each chamber for a straight up and down vote. No more amendments after the conference convenes and reconciles two bills and then files conference report or report language. That goes back to both chambers, and they vote on that report language, and then that's what goes to the president for signature. Now, the clock is ticking here because obviously we want to have this thing done and signed into law before the end of the year. So we're going back up next week, and then the following week we'll be in session right up to probably, I think, the 22nd, 23rd of December. So we're going to get it done. To a large degree, I think the conference process in this case is somewhat ceremonial in that most of the differences had been reconciled from, as the Senate crafted their bill. Quite frankly, there's not a whole lot of differences. There are some pretty stark contrasts, but for the most part, broadly speaking, most everything is agreed to. And when you have those elements already agreed to, it's called out of scope. That means you're not going to revisit those issues. So the things that you're going to focus on are the things that are not agreed to, and there's only a handful of them really, and I think that those things will be reconciled relatively quickly, and we can get report language out, and I do believe firmly that we'll get this thing done by the end of the year.
So out of the the handful of differences that are left between the two versions, is there any one of those that maybe makes you more nervous than the others that could derail the whole thing?
Well, I'm not sure that there's any one thing that could derail it. And quite frankly, I think what we're going to see is some compromises on things like in the itemized deductions category, for example. I think probably you'll see a compromise on mortgage interest deduction. The House is at 500, capped at 500,000. The Senate retains the current language. I think there could be room for some compromise there, but I don't think that's a deal breaker. The medical expense deduction, that will likely that's already survived, or it should. The House repealed it, but the Senate expanded it. I think what you'll see is somewhere we meet in the middle. I just the pass-throughs, I think, has been an issue. You saw Senator Ron Johnson that, he stood up and said, I can't support this as long as the pass-throughs are not being treated, at least, on given some consideration, on the corporate side, where the corporate tax rates were coming down precipitously. I mean, from roughly 35% down to 20 to 22% range. So there's some adjustments there, and I think that will survive the conference, and we'll see a better treatment of pass-through entities.
Good.
I think we'll probably see some differences in the individual brackets. The House bill has only 4. The Senate creates 7 brackets, and they expire in 2025. Ours are 4 brackets, and they are permanent. Now, the whole point of this tax reform was to simplify the code and reduce the number of brackets. So I'm a little confused about why the Senate would eventually, land on 7 brackets and then not make it permanent. That's a little perplexing. But anyway, those are some things. And the death tax, I've got some issues. I don't think any of these things can't be resolved. I think they're all fluid and can be addressed. I think we're going to see a pretty good package.
Yeah.
I think where we have probably stubbed our toe, if you want to know the truth of it, is the messaging has been a disaster. And one of the things that
that actually is my next question. the left's opinion or the way the media is spinning this, they're running polls saying people are really upset about this potential tax deal and everything else. And I wonder how that's affecting your colleagues, who maybe are in more moderate states. You know what I mean? I think everybody here in Arkansas wants a tax cut. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, where you're seeing this really bubble up and create a problem is in states like New Jersey, New York, California. I would say states like Massachusetts, but we don't have any Republicans in Massachusetts. So from the Republican perspective there, it doesn't really matter that much, from a policy perspective. But the reality is the state and local taxes, the SALT deduction. So, and there's been some concern about that here in Arkansas, and you and I have talked about this. One of the things that ought to be is pretty much a clarion call to state legislatures across the country that you can't rely on the federal government to offset your high taxes anymore. So if you truly want to deliver tax relief to your citizens of your state, then the state legislators have got to come up with some solutions and be bold about it. And say we want to reduce taxes. Let's start at the state level and not rely on the federal exclusively for tax relief. And so, look, we have higher taxes in Arkansas than our touch states, and yet we're essentially. The governor has come out and said he's supporting the tax plan, and so, that doesn't mean that we can't make some adjustments to our own tax code here in Arkansas. But the reality is, there are states across the country that have considerably higher taxes than we do, and essentially the SALT deductions are, a backstop, if you will. I hate to call it a subsidy for those folks, but some people use that term. I say it's more of an offset to help lessen the burden of their taxes that they suffer in those high tax states. But essentially the federal taxes are utilized to soften the blow of the high tax states like Illinois and New York and
I think
New Jersey.
If they want to maintain that revenue, some of these states are just going to have to switch models of how they collect it, maybe go to a consumption, versus the, more heavily rely on the income tax. And anyway,
right.
I think it's, the whole thing is fascinating. So we're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. Back on November the 15th, there's this press release here that Rick Crawford leads 99 representatives urging the Army not to award Bergdahl back pay. Here's a quote from a letter. So you got you, along with 99 fellow representatives, wrote a letter to Ryan D. McCarthy, the acting Secretary of the United States Army, urging the United States not to award Private Bo Bergdahl any back pay. Here's a quote from the letter. As an Army veteran myself, I'm concerned that Private Bergdahl may receive more money in back pay than the families of the fallen soldiers who lost their lives searching for him. You want to respond or react any more to that, Rick?
Yeah, I want folks to know who don't know. I want them to understand that the Servicemen's Group Life Insurance, which is an insurance policy that you have as a member of the active military, your Servicemen's Group Life Insurance death benefit is only $150,000. And so these individuals who died in search of a deserter, an acknowledged deserter, and let's be honest about it, the chain of command knew. They knew almost immediately what was going on, and yet these individuals went out and continued to search for Bergdahl, and in the process of those missions, several lost their lives. And to compensate the families, we issued $150,000 checks. Now, fast forward to now, Private now Bergdahl. Let's be honest about it. I don't believe he should have been promoted to sergeant throughout that, but there's a process, and I can explain that if we have a little time. But so when you are first off, when you're in a combat theater, you're getting combat pay and some other additional pay. But when you are taken prisoner and it's deemed that you are a POW, then you also get per diem, that the clock starts ticking on per diem. So this guy advanced, I believe, from PFC to sergeant in absentia, And there's a statute that supports that, and I get it. I don't like it, but that's the way it is. And so the clock starts ticking, and the benefits start to accrue. What they've done, and I think people need to understand this in all fairness and full disclosure, he hadn't been adjudicated. So therefore, they had to allow the benefits to accrue. Therefore, they had to follow the protocol of promoting this individual on time, even though he wasn't within the ranks, so to speak. He didn't, like, for example, when I went to get promoted for E5, I had to go to an E5 board, right? I didn't have an E5 board because he was, the Haqqani network had him. They didn't, seat a board to review his promotion. So they had to do it administratively, and there's a statute that supports that. But so the way you would have, you essentially had to adjudicate this case. We knew he was a deserter, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he was, in fact, a POW. They say, based on his testimony, that he did act according to code of conduct when he was in custody, and that he resisted and tried to escape. And so, therefore, there may be the need for them to pay that back pay. But they're only listening to his testimony, and it's, he might be saying that, but we don't know that. We also know that there's evidence to suggest that he may have given them some vital information to help them target our troops. And so we don't know the extent of that and the veracity of those claims. But we do know, in my opinion, that the judge in question here, who made some very unfortunate remarks in announcing the sentence of Bergdahl, I think there's some malpractice there. They gave him a bench trial as opposed to a jury trial because they knew that a trial of his peers, they would have eviscerated him. But they tried to blame, and the judge even said so, that the jury pool would be prejudiced because of the comments of Donald Trump. However, in saying that himself and indicating the sentence the way he did, he betrayed his own bias, that he himself had been prejudiced the other way based on President Trump's comments. So therefore, I don't think justice was served in either case.
Merry Christmas from the Paul Harrell Program and Conduit Media.
The comments of Donald Trump. However, in saying that himself and indicating the sentence the way he did, he betrayed his own bias, that he himself had been prejudiced the other way based on President Trump's comments. So therefore, I don't think justice was served in either case. That said, the fact remains that the Commanding General of Forces Command, or what we call FORSCOM, will review this case and make the determination whether or not back pay should be awarded. And there may be the legal case to be made that he's entitled to it. But also, the other thing you want to, this will really chap some people. It does me. There is the potential that they will award him the POW medal.
Oh, wow. I hadn't heard
that. Yeah, we don't know that. It's been talked about.
Wow.
And so we're watching this really close. But one thing I want to point out, this is the bigger issue. It's much, much bigger than Private Bo Bergdahl. Problem we have is that the military and the Army is the absolute worst offender. The accession process for the military is not properly vetted. This guy was separated from the Coast Guard. He went through boot camp and then was separated administratively, not a bad conduct discharge or dishonorable, but was separated administratively, and they believed that there was a mental health issue. So the Army is obviously not communicating with other branches, or the recruiters are not asking the right questions or something, but we have a real problem with military accession today, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm continuing to dig on this. I have sent a letter to General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, asking for a further explanation of what the protocol is for military accession and why a guy like Bergdahl fell through the cracks and why he was allowed to serve in a forward area and compromise his unit to the degree that he did. And it has to do with the systemic failure of the military accession process.
Wow. Congressman Rick Crawford, I just want to say thanks for speaking out on this issue. You just educated me. I had no idea of those specifics. I just kind of knew the general headlines. What does he stand to make, like $300,000 in back pay?
It's well over $300,000, and I mean, I can tell you, walk up and hand somebody $300,000. That's typically a life-changing event for them.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not trying to malign Bo Bergdahl. He's been adjudicated. People have their opinions of him, whatever. What the case I want to make and what I want to point to is bigger than Bo Bergdahl. It's a complete administrative failure throughout the Pentagon, but really the Army is the most egregious offender. And I said this in a hearing not too long ago to some generals, and I was very pointed in this, and that this military today, and particularly the Army, bears little resemblance to the Army I served in and to the military that my dad served in. And it's unfortunate that every issue that we address with respect to the military has to be viewed through the lens of political correctness. And that's not what the military should be about. It is not a petri dish for social experimentation. It's to go out and fight and win wars. And people know that, and when they sign up, they're signing up to be warriors. And there's a responsibility with that. Now, look, we have a social contract with these individuals after they separate from the military, as we have not always done right by our veterans, and we're trying to correct that. But we